Hello, this is Kenneth Shenton, hoping that you will join me for the next hour to hear about a British singer who, in 1948, received the ultimate accolade of being invited to America to sing with the legendary Tommy Dorsey Orchestra. His name is Denny Dennis, and this is his story.
You ought to be in pictures, you're wonderful to see. You ought to be in pictures, how beautiful you would be. Your voice would thrill a nation, your face would be adored. You'd make a great sensation with wealth and fame, your reward. And if you should kiss the way you kiss when we are all alone, you'd make every girl and man a fan worshipping at your throne. You ought to shine as brightly as Jupiter and Mars. You ought to be in pictures, my star of stars.
He was the singer to me. I think if you went through the popular singers of the last 50 or 60 years, he would have to be one of the top 2 or 3.
And yet, this great singer, whom Jack Hilton Jr. thinks so highly of, fell on bad times and eventually dropped out of the music business altogether. He was even reduced to languishing in obscure boarding houses. What went wrong? First, let me take you back to the city of Derby, to 20 West Avenue, where on the 1st of November 1913, Denny Dennis was born. He was christened Ronald Dennis Pountain, as his biographer and fellow Derbyan Mike Carey recalls.
He worked on the old LMS railway as an apprentice electrician, and in his spare time he was a sound effects boy at a local cinema, and also quite a keen musician. His older brother played drums and piano, and he got Denny interested as well in a local band called the Mayfair Dance Orchestra. Denny played the drums and the musical saw, and they played local gigs until one famous night when they were playing in a Melody Maker contest at the Drill Hall in Derby, and the band was called upon to play 2 or 3 instrumentals. There was no suggestion of any vocal, but for some reason or other they decided to do a vocal, and Percy Mathieson Brooks, the editor of Melody Maker, was so impressed with the few bars that Denny sang that he passed the word on to Roy Fox in London. Denny went down for an audition with Roy Fox, who was also impressed with his voice, but said, look, you need a little bit more experience. Go away and learn a bit more of your trade for about a year or so, if you can.
So in a year, a much more confident young singer returned to London to see if there was any future for him in the music business. As Denny himself recalls in a rare archive recording, he sought out Percy Mathieson Brooks, the editor of the Melody Maker.
And he said, I was just going to send you a telegram. He said, I want you to do an audition at the Spider's Web for Freddie Brotherton. It's a very nice job. It was, as a matter of fact, it was a very nice roadhouse. Anyway, I did this audition, and Freddie said, oh yes, when can you start? So I was doing that within a week. I was a professional, funnily enough. And then I'd only been in the job a week, and Jack Jackson came up to listen to me. And he was taking place of Henry Hall while Henry Hall was on vacation. And he said, oh, I'd like you to do the broadcast. So that's within a week of being professional, I was doing my first broadcast with Jack Jackson.
Never thought I'd fall, but now I hear love call. I'm getting sentimental over you. Things you say or do just thrill me through and through. I'm getting sentimental over you. I thought I was happy, I could live without love. Now I must admit, love is all I'm thinking of. Won't you please be kind and just make up your mind that you'll be sweet and gentle, be gentle with me, because I'm sentimental over you.
I'm Getting Sentimental Over You, recorded with Jack Jackson's orchestra on the 31st of August 1933. Also the theme of the Tommy Dorsey Orchestra, a supreme twist of irony, as Denny would later reflect. However, after a year at the Spiders Web Roadhouse on the Watford bypass, Denny decided to contact the band leader Roy Fox once again.
Roy decided to give me a fortnight's trial. He said, but I won't use you on broadcast. They did a regular Wednesday night, I think it was, broadcast. He said, until after the trial. But after the first week, on the Wednesday night broadcast coming up, he said, I've decided to use you on broadcast tonight, but I've got to find a name for you. He said, Dennis Bounton, the name's much too long. My full name, you see, was Ronald Dennis Bounton. And I used to be known as Ronnie, which I hated, actually. But when I went to the Spiders Web, I used my second Christian name, Dennis Bounton, you see. He said, I like Dennis. What about Dennis, short for Dennis? How about that? So that's how I got my professional name, Denny Dennis. I started recording with Roy almost immediately, and I think one of the first records was a song called This Is Romance, and the date we recorded that was the 21st of December, 1933.
This is romance, there's a sky to invite us, and a moon to excite us, yet you turn from my kiss. This is romance, it's a moment of splendor, yet you fail to surrender to a night such as this. The dreamy magic of your eyes enchanted my heart, but will the magic of your love be granted my heart? I'm in a trance, let me be heaven-bound, dear. This is paradise found, dear. Sweetheart, this is romance.
So at the tender age of 20, Denny Dennis was under contract to one of the country's leading dance bands, Roy Fox and his orchestra.
I suppose the easiest way to set the scene for today's audience is that they were the rock and roll groups, the giant rock and roll groups of the time. We've all seen the legendary pictures of people queuing 7 times round the block around Madison Square Garden for Frank Sinatra. Used to happen here with the big bands as well. They were the biggest attractions in the country.
Denny went to London, and there's a naive lad from the back streets of Derby, a very humble background, very starry-eyed, and suddenly he's mixing with all these smooth West End musicians, and he's seeing West End in those days exceedingly glamorous in a way it probably isn't today. It all seems rather tawdry when you go there today, but in those days royalty and visiting dignitaries from abroad were always in the Kit Kat Club or the Café de Paris, and that's where he started with Roy Fox, and it's no wonder really that he felt a little bit out of his depth, and he was fair game for all the practical jokes that the people in the band used to play on him.
Denny Dennis came into Roy Fox's band when we were playing at the Kit Kat, a restaurant below the Capitol in Lower Regent Street, and Roy Fox's band played there.
Ivor Morantz, distinguished guitarist with the Roy Fox Orchestra, also an arranger, composer and founder of the Fox Cubs, who became Denny's backing group on many recordings. He became a great friend to the singer. Fellow friends in the band included Harry Gold, Les Lambert and the pianist-arranger Jack Nathan.
Jack Nathan was a very sweet lad, very clever, very good ear, and he became a very good arranger. In fact, he was the sort of resident arranger, because Fox used many arrangers, and the publishers sent down arrangements with their special arrangers like Van Phillips, Benny Frankel, so we had plenty to go on.
your duty to be beautiful. Keep young and beautiful if you want to be loved. Don't fail to do your stuff with a little powder and a puff. Keep young and beautiful if you want to be loved. If your wise exercise all that fat off, take it off, over here, over there. When you're seen anywhere with your hat off, have a Marcel wave in your hair. Take care of all those charms, and you'll always be in someone's arms. Keep young and beautiful if you want to be loved.
The orchestra became one of the most consistent and popular recording and radio bands in Britain. In addition to Denny's basic wage of £8 per week, there were extra payments for recording and broadcasts. Suddenly, he was in the money.
He was a kind lad who didn't have too much up there, and he fell into good hands by falling into our group. He could have had a terrible time. This was actually naivety and believing in fairy tales, or not being able to control your spending, to go in and buy a car just after your first week of earning real money and spending hundreds of pounds on a car, like a Triumph Dolomite. Who would think of buying a Dolomite? At least you buy a Triumph of a lower range. We were very good friends of his. We really looked after him. And Morris Berman suggested that he should collect the wages from Roy and give him spending money. And he agreed to that.
By now, Denny's singing and his seemingly relaxed, laid-back manner were winning many plaudits and led him to being labelled the English Bing Crosby.
He never liked it. Roy Fox, I think, christened him that, and right until the end of his days, it made him bridle at it, because he says that although he did used to listen to Crosby's records, he also used to listen to Ella Fitzgerald and Billie Holiday, and he said, if anything, he got his phrasing, his ability to phrase and sometimes sing a little bit behind the beat. He got that from Billie Holiday, and he was tipped off to listen to her by Morris Berman, the Roy Fox drummer. But the English Bing Crosby, although he recorded some songs that Crosby did, he absolutely hated it. He said, no, I'm just the English Denny Dennis, that's all.
Bing Crosby should have been known as the American Denny Dennis. Denny sounded like Bing Crosby before Bing Crosby sounded like Bing Crosby, actually. I think it was probably a hindrance to Denny in truth. I hate anybody being called the anything, the English anything, the American anything. The American Beatles, the English Bing Crosby, I don't know, anything. It's unfair to the person. Denny and everybody who actually gets landed with that tag is better than that tag that they get landed with. It shouldn't happen.
Among Denny's other attributes was his ability to play the musical saw and sell 1 million records in the process.
It only appeared occasionally. It was on a Hawaiian tune. Hello, hello, beloved. Bow.
Aloha, beloved, aloha.
And he kind of did a little bit of a chorus on that. And I played the Hawaiian guitar, I must confess, which always went down better than the ordinary guitar. And we were surprised to see this unassuming boy, who was a little bit naive, playing a perfectly in tune song. At that time, he was the best singer in the country. Denny had a little bit of a jazz feeling in his singing. He would push his chin forward a little bit and put his head on the side and really bring out the sonorousness of the voice. He took it very seriously, of course. And no amount of ribbing, which he really didn't understand. You could take the mickey out of him without him knowing it. In fact, the boys, I must say, the boys were very cruel. We played all kinds of pranks. We said that if we were able to sing a piece a semitone higher or lower than the pianist was playing it, this would improve his ear. And there was Jack Nathan playing the tune, and he tried to sing it a tone or a semitone higher or lower. Unheard of. Some of them are too horrible to tell.
After residences in London at the Kit Kat Club and the Café de Paris, Roy Fox was made an offer he couldn't refuse to tour the country on the Moss Empire Theatre circuit. Thus, on the 21st of May 1934, the Roy Fox Orchestra opened at the Empire Theatre, Glasgow, the beginning of a new adventure for all the band.
We went on tour, and the crowds were phenomenal. We did the greatest business of anybody. Blackpool, there were 10,000 people dancing in the Palace Ballroom. We did Sunday concerts, broadcasts every Wednesday, I think. And things were going very well. We were earning quite a good bit of money. There were no complaints after that. I don't think there were any problems at all. When one year, Roy Fox called the band in, one by one, because that's how you break the band down, and asked them to take cuts. I'm not sure what they were getting, about £18 a week. And most of them did. And then he called the cabs in. At least I think I engineered that, because I didn't want to go in by myself, because numbers are strength. And he asked us to take a cut, and I refused to take a cut. And he succumbed. He could see that we were determined, so there was no cut. This was in 1937 now.
There was a very well publicised backstage bust-up at the time, and as I said, when Denny went down, there were a lot of hardened pros in that band. You know, the drummer Maurice Berman, who became a very caustic columnist in the Melody Maker, and Ivor Morantz, the guitarist, and a lot of other people, and they reached a point when they were getting a little bit bored, partly because they were playing the same stuff over and over again, and even Denny was a very mild-mannered man. He said, well, we weren't getting any fresh material. But the other point, as with all musicians, was that they didn't think they were getting paid well enough. They went to see Fox to broach the subject with him, and he kept saying, well, times is hard, boys, despite the fact they were broadcasting, making records, and packing them in at the Kit Kat Club.
We used to tour Sunderland. That was one of the Moss Empires. And times were so bad, the unemployed used to stand in the streets, on the pavements. We'd never seen anything like it. This wasn't evident in London, that there was such unemployment, but then there was. And Roy complained, not filling the houses like he used to. He couldn't pay, so he wanted to do the same as before. He wanted to take another cut. But I wasn't interested anymore. I could see that the road was downwards, and I decided to leave. It was long enough, and we left on very amicable terms, as they say. But I also noticed that the bracelets on his wife's arms were increasing in number. And it was time to settle down in town and get some kind of a connection, which is what I did, and in August 1937 I left.
Tired of the constant travelling, the bickering over money, and desperately in need of some new material, Denny was also to leave the Roy Fox Orchestra in 1938. After a little while as a freelance singer, he followed in Ivor Morant's footsteps and moved to join the Ambrose Orchestra.
South of the border, down Mexico way. That's where I fell in love when those stars up above came out to play. And now as I wander, my thoughts ever stray south of the border, down Mexico way.
Working for Fox, we were young, we were inexperienced, we were having fun. And although money was important, it wasn't that important. The most important thing was to play our music, and I'd had opportunities of playing solo guitar, of broadcasting on my own, and making duets with Albert Harris, which were the first guitar duets in England. So it was very exciting, and we were all old friends. But when one came into Ambrose's band, you could feel the tension. He was a perfectionist. If anybody can call a person a perfectionist, it was Ambrose, who insisted on the correct tempo of every number and wouldn't be fobbed off. He was very proud of his band. He paid the best money, and it was a pleasure to work for the band.
When Denny joined Ambrose, the band were resident at the Café de Paris in London's West End. This suited Denny perfectly, but unfortunately there was to be a sting in the tail when Ambrose announced to all and sundry they were going to go back on the road again touring the country. After a year of this with Ambrose, at the end of 1938, he left the band, got married, and went freelance once more.
By this time I was making a lot of money, round about £250 a week, which was, in those days, of course, it was an awful lot of money. But then, when the war broke out, all the commercial radio programs I was doing were wiped out immediately, and all the town halls were taken over for air raid precautions, etc. So for a while, the only thing I was doing was the odd broadcasts and my solo recordings for Decca.
As soon as the war started, the BBC moved to the comparative safety of Bristol, where Denny came into contact with the Jack Hilton Orchestra. Among their recordings together is one entitled Blue Orchids, which took a lot of people by surprise.
I remember when I first heard it. I was probably too young to appreciate it, but I did. It stood out, and it was the whole thing. It was because of the arrangement, because of Denny. That was the wonderful thing, I think, about the Hilton Band. Although it was known for being a show band, it could suddenly turn you around and say, look, we can do these arrangements, we can play these tunes, and, you know, if we've got the people with us to do it, and if that's what's wanted at this particular time, yes, we can do it. And by George, they did it. I mean, it's a superb, I believe it's a Billy Turnant arrangement. It's a superb arrangement, and Denny is just wonderful. And it's a song that's been ignored a lot since, and I think that's sad, because it's a great song.
two beautiful blue orchids one night, while in my lonely room I dreamed of two blue orchids so full of love and light that I wanted to possess each tender bloom. Then my dream took wings, and through 1,000 springs, blue orchids seemed in a world apart. But when I met you, something pale and blue came stealing from the meadows of my heart. I saw my two blue orchids, my beautiful blue orchids last night. And what a sweet surprise. When you looked at me, it was plain to see blue orchids only bloom in your eyes.
While I was at Bristol with the BBC, I had a great surprise one day. A letter came through the post. It said, we have been listening with great interest to your recording south of the border. Would you please send some more records and some photographs, as we're very interested. So I sent photographs and a couple of solo recordings. Then back came a letter with a very famous caricature on. This was Paul Whiteman, and the person that had been writing to me was his personal manager. Would I be interested in going to the States? Which of course I was. But then, unfortunately, as the war was on, the Ministry of Labour turned it down flat.
In 1940, Denny was voted #1 singer by the readers of the Melody Maker, and in the same year he enlisted in the Royal Air Force.
He started out at Uxbridge, like so many musicians did, and then he found himself stationed in Iceland, and when he got back to England, he was able to do some recordings with the Squadronaires, which was the RAF Dance Orchestra, and also with the Skyrockets. was unfortunate in a sense that the war stepped in. But as I used to remind him, and he never argued, I said, well, you had a better war than a lot of people. I mean, his older brother perished off the coast of Iceland. His brother was in the Navy. And Denny had what many people would call a fairly straightforward war with his entertainment, which of course he was cut out for. I think but for that, he would have reached incredible heights, because that was before Sinatra, although after Crosby, and there would have been a niche for him somewhere along the way.
When the war ended in 1945, Denny was once more voted Britain's #1 male vocalist. He moved to the BBC as a resident soloist with the Variety Orchestra and returned to the recording studios once more for Decca Records.
I also decided that I wasn't getting good titles with Decca, and I decided to let my contract lapse. Anyway, I was doing a broadcast with Stefan Grappelli. I suddenly get a telephone call, and it's Harry Sarton, the A&R man of Decca. He said, Denny, I must see you. It's urgent. Meet me at the Savoy Hotel. I thought, what? Savoy Hotel? It was usually the local pub round the corner, you know. So, anyway, off I trooped after the broadcast to the Savoy Hotel. I said, look, Denny, I said, we've just had a letter from the chairman. They've gone wild over your record, Blues Kind of Blues. And he said, and I'm looking through your contract. He said, I found that you're not under contract to us, you see. So then I got a little rise in royalty and photographs by the best photographers in the country, and I was getting acclaim all over, you see, and from even the Hollywood version of Variety, which is, I'm not sure what the paper was called. They were all going for this Blues Kind of Blues record.
It's the bluest kind of blue, my baby says. It's the newest kind of blue, my baby says. It's the kind that makes you sigh. It's the kind that makes you cry. Doing something to my poor heart, like a soft lullaby. It's the bluest kind of blue, my baby sings. It's the truest kind of blues, my baby brings. Always on my mind, awake or sleeping. It's the bluest kind of blue, my baby on my mind, awake or sleeping. It's the bluest kind of blue, my baby
overall it probably did better in America than it did here. And the irony of it was that Stanley Black said the arrangement only took him about 10 minutes. But it was a beautiful arrangement, superbly sung, and it was heard in America. Duke Ellington used to play it on his daily disc jockey show on radio in New York, and no doubt other people as well. And this was heard by several people. He got approaches from Paul Whiteman, Sammy Kaye, and even Benny Goodman, before the big one came from Tommy Dorsey. The reason none of the others came to anything was because they were just towards the end of the war, and the regulations would not permit him to go abroad. But by the time Dorsey approached him, he was able to accept with extreme rapidity.
Denny flew to New York on the 27th of March 1948 for the start of an exciting new venture.
The first time I met Tommy, of course, was aboard his yacht, his lovely yacht, called the Sentimentalist. Marvellous yacht it was. And, of course, Tommy was... I'd been on vacation, and on the third day, flew out from New Jersey to Miami, and we started rehearsing there. The rehearsal started at 2 in the morning till 4 a.m, so that we'd have all the day to ourselves. But not me. The first thing I got was about 30 song titles I'd never even heard, and I got to memorize these things. so I was the people thought I was going mad for repeating lyrics to myself over and over and over, you know.
Denny didn't like touring, but I think the sheer novelty of it all in America and the glamour and the fact that you could get food over there at that time that was unheard of over here, he just got swept along with it. He got some very good social mates in the Dorsey band that used to show him around New York when they'd finished work and everything else. And his first broadcast with the band was from a place which is now very well known to everybody, Orlando. At the Coliseum there, he went on the air for the first time, a very accomplished broadcast it was, and then travelled through 35 states, I think it was, in possibly a couple of months or even less.
While the Angelus was ringing, calling for the evening prayer, I could hear the choir singing, and I saw you standing there. Silently I stood beside you. How my heart was beating there. For my dreams had all come true. I was safely back with you, never more to roam again. Then the great cathedral spire seemed to come alive and say, through the voices of the choir, there will be a wedding day. Then a golden ray of sunlight from a window in the sky shone upon us from above. Heaven's blessing on our love. Now our love will never die.
Unfortunately, most of the time Denny was with Tommy Dorsey. The American Federation of Musicians were operating a ban on all commercial recordings, so sadly, Denny was unable to make any records for almost 12 months. While on the surface everything was fine with Denny's American adventure, underneath he was suffering enormous mental pressures. Back home, his marriage had crumbled, and after months of turmoil, Denny reluctantly decided to return home in April 1949. His stay with Tommy Dorsey had lasted only 14 months.
Shone upon us from above, heaven's blessing on our love. Now our love will never die.
Unfortunately, no one really knows the full facts about this, and I don't think even Denny knew that, because by that time he'd got a son, David, who was born in Bristol when he was there with the BBC, and his marriage, like many show business marriages, was on the rocks. And while he was with Dorsey, the cables were flying thick and fast across the Atlantic. And I think in this day and age, when you can just pick the phone up and talk to people so easily, I think he could have probably got around it. But then communications weren't so good, and he felt he just had to come back to England to sort things out, which was unfortunate because Dorsey had told him that he wanted to sign him up under his own agency as well as with the band, with a possible view to promoting him eventually as a solo artist in America.
What he should have done is stayed with it. I think the American music had moved forward because for the early part of the war they hadn't been quite as involved as we had. And also the Americans are more accept change. They will accept that sort of thing. Yes, Denny should probably have stayed there. I think the style of music, the style of arranging by that stage suited him better than anything that was likely to happen in England.
He came back to sort everything out, yes. To his regret, he'd not applied. He should have applied for a permanent work permit for America, which would have allowed him to go to and fro, but he couldn't get another one straight away. And there were so many problems with the lawyers and everything else that he decided to stay put over here. And he was okay because he'd still got his Decca recording contract, and he'd stockpiled quite a few recordings for them before he went to America, because at the back of their minds they wanted to be covered in case he did become even better known than he was. And that was okay back in England for a time, and he went on the halls and one or two things. But of course, by then, into the 50s, the music scene was changing, and it was a little...
The 1950s were to be a difficult time for Denny. As he himself so touchingly remarked, "My problem is, I don't sing rock and roll." It was to prove a sad but fitting epitaph.
He went up north, and obviously there was a thriving club circuit then in the north of England, and he did all right there. And he finished up at a club in Yorkshire where unfortunately he had a row with the management, and the lady that ran the place expected him to do everything, not only to be the master of ceremonies at the evening cabaret and sing his own songs, but also to collect everybody's football pool money and things like that. And the last straw came when she came to him one day and said, "I wish you'd wear a woolly sweater like Val Doonican." So he finished with that, and then he worked as a clerk in a paper mill in Yorkshire for a time, but things were not going so well. By that time he'd married again and lived on a caravan park near Bridlington. The marriage never worked. I think he was really so lonely, he was quite desperate. And it was around that time he'd already met the lady who was to, I think, and she thinks, and I think Denny pretty well admitted it, saved his life. And she was Beryl Showers. Her husband, John, ran a hotel in the suburbs of Leeds, which was frequented by show business people. They would stay there for their digs. And Denny was in there passing through some time or other and having a drink, as he was tended to do at times, and was singing away in the bar quietly. And John said to him, "Oh, are you still singing?" "Oh, yes." He said, "Well, if you can sing like that here, why don't you do a bit professionally?" So he stayed there as a kind of resident cabaret for quite a while. And later on, when he had real problems, by that time John Showers had passed away, and it was Beryl to whom he turned. And he'd reached rock bottom, I think. He got nowhere to live. Everything had been thrown out of his flat in Yorkshire. He lost a lot of his personal possessions, like his own recordings. And he travelled down to appear in a kind of nostalgia show in Wolverhampton. When he finished that, he didn't really know what to do. So he rang up Beryl, and she said, well, come up here. By that time, she was running a pub in Broughton-in-Furness in Cumbria. And she said, if you come up here, there's a room for you and there's a job for you. And they finished up living together for the last 12 years of his life.
He didn't drink at all at the beginning, and then he began to drink. It thickened his voice, it thickened everything. I don't know if it thickened his brain. It's a very sad story. It's a sad story because he could have been a great singer. He could have been the best singer here. You see, Al Bowley came in between, and Al Bowley is remembered. He's remembered and lauded. But Denny Dennis isn't.
If Denny thought that in retirement in Cumbria he would be forgotten, he was very much mistaken. Appearing on the soundtrack of the Dennis Potter series Pennies from Heaven brought Denny to a whole new, younger audience. Pilgrims from afar sought him out, including Mike Carey, who formed the Denny Dennis Music Society. Typical of the younger generation of enthusiasts is Steve Ainsley, who has used his talents as a sound engineer to restore the singer's records.
The Denny Dennis Society made a promise to Denny that he would reissue on a very limited edition for fans only every one of his recordings from the beginning to the end in chronological order. Obviously these exist in various states of quality, either old 78s or tapes, or some of them may be on albums. And the first one, the complete Denny Dennis Volume 1, was virtually sold out, bar I think 1 or 2 copies. And now we've just completed the complete Denny Dennis Volume 2 and the War Years tape.
I'll sing you 1,000 love songs, and still they'll seem so few, for I need 1,000 voices to tell you how I love you. I've only one heart to give you, one voice to listen to. So I'll bring 1,000 love songs, and I'll sing every one, dear, for you.
There was easily 1,000 love songs. You tend to look at the downside of his career because of the missed opportunities with Tommy Dorsey, etc., etc. But really his career stemmed from the 30s onwards, and he appeared with the greatest bands in this country. And there are very few artists today who can say that their career spanned that long and was so successful.
And though it's such a little thing to do, dear, I'll sing to you, dear, my whole life long.
Highly popular artist in his day before the war. I mean, this man could afford brand new cars and top grade models. He was the man, you know. It was terrific. So he had a marvelous life during his day. Unfortunately, the music changed, and where he could have been protected from that in America with the Tommy Dorsey Orchestra, in this country he was sort of, I say reduced in inverted commas, to recording for the Embassy label covers of pop hits of the day.
Love me forever. Take me, make me your own. Promise you'll never leave me lost and alone. Kiss me.
I think he was the nearly man. everything that happened to him never quite reached fruition. The fact he never had a stable private life could not have helped him. The fact he never had a close friend who would have managed his careers, who he could have trusted, that couldn't have helped him. But despite that, he was a very resilient man and a very modest man. And this was another factor, I think, by show business standards. I don't think he lacked confidence in his own ability, but he was not what you'd call a pushy man. And even in the latter stages of his life, he would admit that he was a bit on the introspective side. He always had been. And when he sang, he never really liked singing in concert halls or theatres. So he's also a very brave man, because he did a lot of that.
What more can I say? I love you, I do. If you went away, I'd be lonesome and blue. You're one in a million, there's not even two. What more can I say?
Denny Dennis died on November the 2nd, 1993, just one day after his 80th birthday. Today, the city of Derby remembers one of its most famous sons with considerable pride. What more can we say?
I love you, that's putting it mild. What more can I say?
But he entertained people. I think that's the best thing you can say for any entertainer.
All about you, honest I do.
A first-class artist, without any doubt at all, who didn't know how lucky he was with what he had, and didn't really know how to use it to his own advantage. He had no harm in him at all. He was very kind. And his fundamental nature, when I saw him a few years ago, wasn't any different from the original nature. And he had some very great blows delivered, which might have floored other people.
You're an angel, you're a sweetheart, you're my one desire.
Is one of the greatest singers that this country has ever produced in that genre, and is probably one of the nicest people I've ever met in show business, especially in this country.
A wonderful artist, and although it's a cliche, a true gentleman.
All about you, honest I do. I shout and I rave, my heart won't behave. In fact, I'm going crazy over you. Your
Particular thanks are due to Mike Carey, Steve Ainsley, Jack Hilton, Ivor Morantz, together with Anne Hopper and BBC Radio Cambria. The script was written and presented by Kenneth Shenton, and the producer was David Perry. What More Can I Say was a Periscope production for BBC Radio 2.
What more can I say? What more